I wonder if you've ever thought about the power of a name. Names are pretty powerful. They're pretty important. The first thing we do when we meet someone new is we say, hey, what's your name? Because names are important. They give us like a sense of our identity. But I wonder if you know how powerful really a name is, what we call ourselves, how powerful that is, and how it really determines, in many ways, studies are showing, determines the outcome of our lives, the trajectory of our lives. Did you know that if your name is like Jacqueline or Stephen, chances are your life is going to fare better than if your name is like Latrina or Butch? It's true. And your name will actually indicate, in many cases, what kind of grades you get in school, where you end up living, what you do for a living, who you end up marrying. I mean, does it seem coincidental to you that the fastest man on the planet's name is Usain Bolt? I mean, is that a coincidence? Or that a very famous weather forecaster for the BBC network is Sarah Blizzard? I mean, that seems like more than a coincidence to me. Psychologist Richard Wiseman says this. He says, your name can influence the assumptions that other people make about your character and background, and thus the chances you are given in life. It can also be sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If your name sounds intelligent, successful, and attractive, you are more likely to act those things. Case in point, Richard Wiseman, Professor Wiseman. I mean, how does that happen? Names are very important. Studies are showing that that we're attracted to things that are like us, even the very letters of our name. So that if your name is Denise, you're much more likely to be a dentist than a dermatologist. That Lawrences are way overrepresented as lawyers and Raymonds as radiologists. And there's actually a Latin term for this, and it's called nomen est omen, which means the name is a sign. That the name is kind of a sign of who we become and the direction that we go in life. Again, just think of some of the career choices that people have made probably because of their name. What about race car driver Scott Speed? Or the TV horticulturist garden presenter Bob Flowerdew? I mean, you think his name has something to do with the profession he got into? I don't know. Or singer Bill Medley. We've got golfer Tiger Woods. How appropriate that he got into golf. We have poet William Wordsworth. Or former White House Speaker Larry Speaks. This is one of my favorite now. I mean, tell me that this person's name did not impact the career they chose. How about attorney Sue Yu? I love it. Wow. That is perfect. But then, of course, there are some ironic names that don't really work, like former Archbishop of Manila, Cardinal Jamie Sin, and the pain management specialist, Dr. Richard Payne. Names matter. Names are important. Fortunately, names mean a lot to my wife. She, in high school, ended up dating a guy with the last name Rumblefish. And after a couple dates, she realized that she would never be Kim Rumblefish, and so she broke it off. Right? Isn't that good? But then she met me, and she liked the sound of Kim Kennedy. So that worked out well for me and for us, I think. I mean, I think we're all winners because of that. Names matter a lot. And names matter when the identity or the identifying names that we give ourselves regarding our faith. What is your favorite label that you give yourself when it comes to your faith or lack thereof? Maybe you're here today and you don't practice a traditional religion. What is your favorite label that you give yourself? Maybe you say, probably I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic, and you lean fully into that identity. Or maybe you're one of the new apathists. The people, I just don't really care. I'm an apathist. Or I'm an antagonist. I'm going to go after people of faith. The names that we choose for ourselves matter as well. Or what about if you are a person of faith? What is your favorite label for yourself? What do you call yourself? What you call yourself matters. There's a lot of names for people of faith, people who follow Jesus, that the Bible uses that are still around today. Bible uses terms for us like disciples, which simply means a learner, someone who's a learner. Or the Bible also uses, and many people today will say, well, I'm a believer, which means you believe. Right? I remember having a conversation with a guy who identified himself with Christ, and he would have said he was a Christian, but he said he was a believer and not a disciple. And I said, well, what's the difference? And he said, well, as a believer, I believe in Jesus, and as a result, I believe I'll be saved. I just don't follow him. And I don't like listen to the things that he says, but I do believe that he is the Son of God. And I was just scratching my head like, what? How can you make that kind of distinction? But it worked for him. Another favorite term for followers of Jesus in the book of Acts, particularly Luke loved this one. Apostles was one Jesus gave to his first 12 that followed him. It simply means sent ones. But the one that Luke liked in the book of Acts was followers of the way. Jesus said that he was the way, and so those who followed him were followers of the way. Another real famous one in the New Testament, one that they like to use a lot for people of faith, was the term saint. Now, that may not be one that you use for yourself a lot. Hey, what are you? Are you a Christian or not? No, I'm a saint. We shy away from that. It kind of feels like, a little presumptuous. But saint just simply means that you're set apart, or that you're made holy for a special purpose. But of course, the one that's really famous today, and the one that we think of instinctively when we think of followers of Christ, is the term Christian. Now, Christian, you may be surprised to know that the term Christian only shows up 3 times in the New Testament. And the first time it shows up is in the book of Acts, chapter 11. So this is a good 25, 30 years after the death of Christ. And it comes in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 11, where Luke records the disciples, those who were known as disciples, were called Christians first at Antioch. And you may be surprised to know that this was not a term that was a term of endearment, or it wasn't a flattering term. That in Antioch, the Christians began to be seen as criminals because they would not worship the Caesars. And so they were looking for some kind of a political nickname or a charge against these followers of Jesus who would not bow down and worship the Caesars. It's like, what can we call them? And the term Christian simply means those who belong to Christ. And in Antioch, it's very appropriate that this is the first time they were called Christians there, because Antioch was famous for mocking people, right? This is like the SNL of the ancient world, right? And so for the first time in Antioch, they're called Christians. It's kind of a slanderous term. But the early Christians, the early followers of Jesus, adopted it as their own term. And they said, yeah, we belong to Christ, and we're going to wear that with a badge of pride. Now, 2,000 years later, the term is still very popular, but it's taken on quite a bit of baggage. A lot of people use the term Christian, kind of like my friend who said he was a believer but not a disciple. And it's kind of who I am. I was born into it. I was raised in it, but it doesn't really affect the way I live. I'm not really following Jesus. I'm just a Christian. Or it's not very descriptive of who we are, maybe, or what we're about. So we are in the middle of a series where we're kind of unpacking a sentence that describes where we think we're going as a community and what we want to be. It's called a vision statement. And we've been unpacking it for the last couple of weeks, and this is the statement. It's simply that we would want to be a diverse gathering of Christ followers seeking the good of our city. And for the last 2 weeks, we unpacked what it means to be a diverse gathering and why that would be important to God. We talked about what it means to be the gathering, this gathering that Jesus promised he would build. But today I want to focus in on this term, Christ followers, because this is our favorite kind of self-identifying name here at Newday, that we are Christ followers. Are we Christians? Yes, we're certainly Christians. We don't shy away from that term. But again, that term has a little bit of baggage. Again, it could be just something you're born into, or a box that you check on a survey when you're asked your religious preferences. But again, it doesn't really make a difference in your life. But Christ follower is very descriptive, and it's an action-oriented kind of a term. That means I am actually following this person who lived 2,000 years ago and now reigns at the right hand of God, named Christ, that I am following him. And it's a very descriptive word. And following is something that we kind of get a sense of in our culture today, because we're all following all kinds of people. We're being followed by all kinds of people on social media, right? We follow people on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat. And what does that mean? Well, it means we occasionally check in with them and see what they're saying, or what pictures they're posting, or what they're up to. And then we follow them and hope that they'll follow us back, Hashtag follow for follow, right? We're trying to get followers by following other people. Is this what it's like to be a follower of Christ? Is it like being a follower of like a Taylor Swift or Kim Kardashian on Twitter? Is that what following Jesus is like? Well, Jesus made it really clear what it means to be one of his followers. From the very first time he called his first 12 around him, he made it very clear what his expectation for them would be and what their job description would be. And if we were to boil it all down to one word, you've been hearing it through all the songs this morning from Tim. If we were to boil it all down to one word, it's this one word: connection. What does it mean to be a follower of Christ? It's all about connection. It was early in the ministry of Jesus, and he had been attracting large crowds. People were coming from far and near. He was developing a name for himself as a teacher and as a healer. And it was time for him to choose his first followers, his first disciples. And so after spending a night of prayer up on a mountainside, seeking the guidance of his Father, he came back down and he called his followers to himself. And this is the way Mark records what happened next in Mark chapter 3. It says, Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. And so here's the job description. The faint of heart need not apply, because you are going to be sent out to preach the gospel and to cast out demons. That's what I want you to do, Jesus says. You're going to preach the gospel and you're going to cast out demons. But before you do anything for me, Jesus says, I have something that's very, very important. And did you catch what he said there? The very first part of the job description. He called the 12 to him that they might be with him. So before he sent them out to do anything, the first thing they needed to be was to be with him, to connect to him. That's the way he said it, that they might be with him. And what we have here is an invitation from Jesus to his followers to enter into close proximity, to enter into relationship, to be connected to him. And that's what they did for the next 3.5 years, is they spent 24/7 together. They walked together and they journeyed together and they ate every meal together and they slept together. And they were able to get to know one another. And the disciples would watch Jesus as he interacted with people, as he would heal a leper, or he would pray for a blind man and they would get their sight back, as he would teach about the kingdom of God, as he would interact with those on the margins and those that the religious leaders considered to be sinners, and how he was very welcoming and just seemed to get along very well with people on the margins and on the outside. They took it all in. And then Jesus would say, hey, how about you? Why don't you pray for this one? And I want you to go to this town and I want you to tell them that the kingdom of God is near, just as you heard me say it. And he was sending them out and he was coaching them along the way. And over 3.5 years of being with him, these 12 men began to actually look like him in some ways, to act like him, to talk like him, to use the same words, to pray the way he did, to look at scriptures the way he did. This is what their job description was, that they might be with him. And it was so important that on the last night of Jesus' life, knowing that he was going to be going away, knowing what he was about to do, to die for the sins of the world, to rise again, to ascend back to the right hand of God, knowing that he was going to be leaving them in some way, certainly sending them the Spirit, but they wouldn't be able to see him anymore. The last night of his life, he wanted to make it even clearer what their job would be as followers of Christ than he did the first day that he called them. And John is now the one who records what happens that last night. It says that Jesus was with his disciples. It was the Passover. They celebrated the Passover meal together in an upper room in the heart of Jerusalem. Jesus did some teaching. He taught them about the Lord's Supper. He washed their feet. He told them what was about to happen. And then they left that upper room and they started heading for the Garden of Gethsemane, down this hill outside of the walls of Jerusalem, where Jesus would pray and be arrested and where the disciples would be scattered and those end events of Jesus' life would take place. But as they're making that journey from the upper room to the Garden of Gethsemane, walking down this hill, there's a vineyard outside of the walls of Jerusalem. And as they're walking through the vineyard, Jesus sees an opportunity one more time to teach this vital lesson of what it means to be a follower of Jesus and how to have success. And this is how John records it. Jesus tells him in the vineyard, remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. And Jesus is saying this almost as a prophecy. You will bear fruit. You must bear fruit. I'm leaving. Now it's all up to you. I need you to spread the kingdom of God. I need you to go to every nation, kindred, tribe, and people. I need you to tell them what I'm about to do, that I've died for sins, that heaven is now open, that God is not counting men's sins against them, that I'm coming again, that I have all authority. I need you to bear fruit. And if you're going to bear fruit, you need to stay connected to me. You need to remain in me as I am in you. He goes on and says, I am the vine and you are the branches. Again, he's in this vineyard. And I just imagine him just pointing at it. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. So Jesus uses these imperative verbs, remain in me. Other translations have abide in me. The idea is stay connected to me. And when he used it, it was in the imperative form. In other words, it was a command. He is commanding them, remain in me, abide in me, stay connected to me. This is not a suggestion from me to you. I'm not saying if you feel like connecting to me, then do it once in a while, just kind of drift around through life and every once in a while kind of check in. No, he's commanding them. If you want to bear fruit, if you want to be called Christ followers, you need to remain in me and stay connected to me. And again, I just imagine him as he's going through the vineyard, as he comes to one of those big, thick vines with the branches shooting out. I just imagine him kind of reaching over and pointing to that intersection where the branch connects to the vine. You can see from the branch this beautiful fruit. And he's saying, if you want to bear fruit like this is what it's all about, this connection point where the branch attaches to the vine. This is what you need to focus on. Because if you stay connected to me the way this branch is connected to the vine, you're going to bear the kind of fruit that this vine is bearing. But then I imagine him saying, maybe taking a branch and breaking it off of the vine and holding it up as a symbol and saying, but if you do not stay connected to me, just as this branch will never bear fruit again, you will not bear fruit. You can do nothing on your own. It's all about staying connected to me. And for those of us who are passionate Christ followers, who want to love God more and serve people better, this has got to be the most vital metaphor to our spiritual lives. That we would say, as a follower of Christ, more than anything, my responsibility, my calling is to stay connected to Jesus, that his life would be in my life because of our connection, that because I am connected to him the way the branch is connected to the vine, that his power would be in me, so that the same fruit that God bore in his life would be seen in my life as well. This is our calling. You know, we could understand what it would be like to stay connected to a guy who we could follow around through the streets and the byways and highways of Israel. We could understand how you could model your life after and remain with a guy who you could see and touch and actually hear what he has to say, hear his correction. And that's what it would have been like for those original disciples. They were able to see that. But the question is, how do we stay connected to a God we cannot see and a God that we cannot literally hear, or who is going to actually correct us, right? And this must have been something that the disciples grappled with as well, because that night in the vineyard, Jesus was going away. And he's still saying it's just as important you stay connected to me, whether you could see me or you can't, whether you can hear me or you can't. You still need to stay connected to me. So the question is, how did they do that? How do we do that? How do we stay connected to a God that we can't see? And the answer to that is by following Jesus. Because this is the same thing that he had to deal with his entire life. He's not asking us to do something that he hasn't already done himself. Jesus' entire ministry was dependent on the power of the Father in him. And he could not see his Father. And so he had to do things in his life to stay connected to his Father who was unseen. And the disciples witnessed that for 3.5 years, how Jesus would go off to a solitary place to be by himself with his Father. And then he would come back, and all of a sudden he would be like, okay, I know what we need to do now. Or I know where we're going. I feel more refreshed now. Or he would spend these long times in prayer, or he would fast, or he would spend time in the scriptures, or just the time in the fellowship, or how he would go to the synagogue every Sabbath to get recharged and to hear the scriptures again. That Jesus had these practices in his life that kept him connected to the Father. And through that connection, he had the power that he needed to serve and save the world. And so when Jesus went back to heaven, the disciples knew how to stay connected to an unseen God. And so they began to do the same disciplines, the same practices that they saw Jesus doing. They spent time on their own, and they spent time in Scripture, and they went to synagogue every Sabbath, and they prayed, and they met together, and they encouraged one another, and all these things they saw Jesus doing, they did. And followers for the last 2,000 years have been connecting to Jesus in the same way. It's what we would call here spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices. And those are kind of scary terms. Spiritual discipline. Ooh, that just sounds so scary. What does that mean? Well, it's just something that's spiritual that we do that takes discipline, right? Or we call them spiritual practices. What's that? Well, it's just something that we practice again and again that kind of connects us to Jesus. Very simply, a spiritual discipline or spiritual practice is just something that I do on a regular basis that connects me to God. And so some of the things that we do that we would call spiritual practices that Jesus did, that the heroes of faith have been doing for a long time, are again, the same things that we saw Jesus doing. It would be prayer, time in solitude, singing worship songs, reading the Bible, fasting. And we don't necessarily have to go through and do all these things like a checklist, but the question is, what do I need to do in my heart to connect me to God right now, where I am? And then how can I do that on a regular basis so I stay connected? Attending church on a regular basis is a spiritual discipline. Going to small group is a spiritual discipline that grows me. Serving in the church, serving in the world. All these things are putting myself in an environment or allowing myself to do an activity that keeps me connected to Jesus so that I can bear fruit. But we have to be careful with spiritual practices because maybe you've experienced this, maybe you've seen this, but spiritual practices can be abused. We could approach spiritual practices entirely the wrong way. Maybe thinking that, by praying, by studying the Scriptures, by journaling, by attending church and going to small group or serving in the community, that by doing these things, either I'm going to look more spiritual and impress the people around me. And Jesus had a lot to say about that. Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. You'll have your reward already. Or maybe we think by doing these things, we're going to somehow impress God or earn some points with God. Well, God's surely going to bless me now because I've been putting in my time, right, God? Or that somehow we're going to bless God somehow by spending time with him. I've heard people say, well, if I don't get to my quiet time, I just have this feeling that God is sad. And certainly God wants to spend time with us, but God doesn't need anything from us. The reason for the spiritual disciplines, we need to be really clear on this, is not for God's sake or the sake of anybody else. It's for my sake. That if being a Christ follower is all about staying connected to Jesus, and he made it so clear that's what it's about. Be with me, remain in me, abide in me. You could bear no fruit apart from me. And we live in a world where it is incredibly difficult to stay connected to Jesus. There are so many distractions trying to pull us in every different way. Then the entire work of the Christ follower should be about staying connected. Right? That's where all of our effort goes, just staying connected. And so spiritual disciplines aren't for God, they're not for anybody else, they are for me because my spiritual life depends on it. Apart from him, I could bear no fruit. And when I disconnect myself from Christ, if I don't stay connected to Jesus, all of a sudden I wither and die like a branch that's been pulled off of a vine. And so I wonder, what's working for you right now to keep you connected to Jesus? What spiritual practices have been helping you not only to stay connected, but to grow the circumference of your connection? If you think of the vine on the branch and the branch on the vine, just think of the circumference growing so there could be more of Christ and more of his power, more of his life in me. What are you doing that's working? I'd love to hear from you. As a matter of fact, this week I'm going to put something on our Facebook page asking that question. And I would love it if you'd be able to say, hey, right now at my stage of life, this is what I'm doing, or this is what I'm starting. I'm going to be reading, or I'm journaling, or I'm doing this in the car, or I'm doing this with this group of people, or I'm serving in this place in the community. It's really making me come alive. It'd be great to be able to hear from one another, start a dialogue about what you're doing that's working. But as you think about that, I want to just end our time together this morning by looking at one of my favorite tools to stay connected to Jesus that we have here at Newday. And then look at some data that we recently connected on how we're doing at this. And then I want to leave you with one practical suggestion of how you can grow spiritually and stay connected to Jesus in 2018. But first of all, let me tell you about my favorite tool that we have here at Newday, and it's called the Personal Growth Plan, or what we call the Spiritual Growth Plan. And you may say, plan and spiritual, that just seems so incompatible. You can't plan spiritual things. That's unspiritual. You can't plan, right? But the reality is, again, if our entire role as Christ followers is to stay connected to Jesus, and we live in a world where it's incredibly difficult to stay connected to Jesus, then if I don't plan to stay connected to Jesus, I will fail to stay connected to Jesus, right? And so we need to have a plan. So we have this thing called the spiritual growth plan, so we can be intentional. And this is kind of what it looks like. On the one, don't try to read that, please. But on the one side, it begins to talk about how we grow spiritually according to Jesus and according to our own experience. And we see that 3 necessary ingredients go into growing us spiritually. Just like a seed needs soil and water and sun, we need these 3 things to grow. And the first thing is relationship, spiritual relationship. That I need to be involved in a grow group or meet regularly with a friend to discuss the Bible or find a partner to encourage me to stay connected to Jesus. That relationships are such a vital part of growing spiritually. And so I need to take that into account as I put my plan together. Also, spiritual practices. We just talked about those, whether it's committing to reading the Bible or praying regularly, journaling on a Bible or other spiritual book, or spending time in solitude or fasting or Sabbath morning worship. Whatever it may be, that we have these things that we're regularly doing to connect to Jesus. And then finally, spiritual experiences are very important. That we would put ourselves in a place where God can grow us, like going on a spiritual retreat or a mission trip or being baptized or serving in the community or attending a class or whatever it may be. That we need all 3 of these things to be a part of what our plan is, because all 3 of these things grow us. And then on the other side of this card that every one of you is going to get as you leave today, by the way, and I hope you will put it into practice, it talks about how to put the plan together, actually, and how to put all 3 of those things into some kind of a structure that you're going to use throughout the year. And we would encourage you, number 1, to make it measurable. If you're going to have a plan to grow spiritually, it's got to be measurable. So a lot of times we'll use the word more. Well, I want to do this more. I want to pray more. I want to read the Bible more. I want to go to church more. I want to be in my group more. But more is not measurable. Right? And so the question is, what are you going to do that would be measurable? So maybe it would be, I'm going to read the Bible 4 or 5 times a week. I'm going to pray every day for 10 minutes. I'm going to meet with a friend twice a month to talk about what we're learning in the Bible. Make sure that it's measurable. And then number 2, we would say, make it realistic. If you're right now not praying at all, to set a goal of praying 2 hours a day, every day, it's probably not realistic, right? So make it realistic. You want it to be meaningful, what you're going to be doing. You want it to make an impact in your life, but you want it to be realistic and doable. And the last thing I would say about putting together a great plan would be, and you may think this is silly, but you've got to write it down. That's why we hand these things. You've got to write it down. You may think, well, I've got the plan in my mind, but study after study after study shows if you write something down, you're much more apt to do it. I read a study this week on one psychologist who did a study on hundreds of people in their goal setting, and she found that if you write your goals down, you're 42% more likely to keep them. And she explained why. She said, if you just think about your goals, it stays in the right hemisphere of your brain, the imagination side of your brain. But when you go to write it down, it actually creates a connection in your brain to the left side of your brain, the more logical side of your brain. And what that does is when you write it down is it sends a message to every cell in your body that this is what I want, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get it. Right? So we need to write these things down. It actually, God wired us to do this. All right, so that's the tool. You're going to get one as you leave. But here's what I want to talk about now. How are we doing with all of this as a church? So at the end of 2017, you may have seen that we did a year-end survey. And in the year-end survey, we asked questions like, hey, how often are you reading and reflecting on the Bible? How often are you praying, engaging in prayer? How would you describe the stage of spiritual growth that you find yourself in right now? And 100 adults took part in the survey, which, by the way, thank you very much for those of you who did it. A special thanks for those of you who did it the first time I asked. As you may have seen, I had to keep saying, could you please fill this out? Because we had to get to 100. So, but thank you very much. We got some amazing data, and I'm going to share a little bit with you right now. But first of all, with Bible reading, we asked this question: how often do you read and reflect on the Bible? 25% of you say daily. On a daily basis, the Bible is a part of my life. That's pretty amazing. Another 36 say several times per week, which means a full 61%, more than 6 out of 10 people sitting in this room are engaging in the Bible at least several times a week. That is amazing. It's very, very formative, as we'll see. How about this? Several times a month was 22%, a few times a year, 15%. Only 2% said they never read and reflect on the Bible. That's okay. How about prayer? We asked this question. How often do you engage in morning or evening prayer? Wow, a lot more people praying than engaging in the Bible. 57% are praying on a daily basis, engaging God in prayer. 27% say several times a week. So that's like 84% right there that are praying at least several times a week. Again, a good, healthy sign. Oh, look at that. Where'd that go? I'll go over here. Then we have several times per month. 12%, a few times a year, 2%, and then never 2% again. Look at that. How about this question? Where would you say you are in your spiritual journey at this stage right now? How would you describe your pace of spiritual growth? 9% say that they are in a season of rapid spiritual growth. And if you're there, you know you're there because life is exciting and God is doing amazing things in your life and you just feel like I need to fasten the seatbelt. We can't stay there, but when we're there, it's an amazing time when God is just growing us rapidly. 9% say they're there right now. 27% say they're growing at a moderate pace. 49% say they're growing at a slow and steady pace. 2% say they're content right where they are. I don't know who these two people are, but when they took this survey, they were in a bad mood because they don't read the Bible and they don't pray, and I'm content right where I am. I'm not going anywhere. So if you're here today, I love you, and I'm praying for you. 12% say, I have stalled spiritually. Now, this is pretty much in line with national averages, but yeah, this is the person that says, I'm in a rut, and I've been in this rut for a while. I'm not really going anywhere spiritually. I'm not growing. And it's not a good place to be, and I'd really love to get out of this rut. And if I could tell you one thing that you can do in 2018 that is guaranteed to get you out of stalled, to get you growing, to widen the circumference on your connection to Jesus, would you want to hear that? Would you say, I might actually even write that down on a spiritual growth plan and actually implement it in 2018? Because I'm going to tell you what we learned from this data, but it's also something that's been backed up by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of surveys done on Christians that determine what catalyzes our growth, what keeps us connected to Jesus. And here's how I found it on this survey is once we got all the survey data back, I started playing with it. And I started looking for trends. I started looking for anomalies. What are the catalytic things in the survey that really help people grow? And I kind of geek out on that kind of stuff. I have some fun with it. So first I separated out people who say they're going to Parker and people who say they're going to Denver. I'm looking, is one site more like spiritual and connected than the other? And you know what I found? No. You guys are exactly alike. It's awesome. So everyone's kind of on par. Then I started looking at what about the people who are maybe living missionally or the people who are serving in the community? Is there anything different about these people? Are they growing at a different pace? There are some things a little different here or there, but nothing really conclusive. But then what I did was I looked at the 25% of people who say that they are reading and reflecting on the Bible on a daily basis. And my mind was blown because the numbers on every indicator were through the roof. Let me just show you this. So I keyed in on this. Those 25% of people who say they read the Bible every day. Now, this is a big pool of people, so this is very solid data for a church our size. Here's what I found. A couple of things. They're 42% more likely to serve in the community weekly. That they're 25% more likely to be living missionally, in other words, engaging with people outside of the faith in a hope of being able to share their faith at some point. That these people are 72% more likely to pray on a daily basis. Or how about this? If you read and reflect on the Bible on a daily basis, you are 320% more likely to be in a season of rapid spiritual growth. 29% of people who say they read and reflect on the Bible on a daily basis said, I am in a season of rapid spiritual growth, compared to only 9% who we don't know how often they're reading the Bible. This is conclusive data. And so, and again, other studies prove this as well. It doesn't matter what stage of spiritual growth you're in. If you're reading and reflecting on the Bible on a regular basis, it will be catalytic. It will connect you to Jesus. You will grow. And so, what do we do with this? I hope what you would do with this is that you would read the Bible, that you would reflect on the Bible on a daily basis. If you want to stay connected to Jesus, if you want to live into this name that we've given ourselves of Christ follower, that you would live as a Christ follower. You would connect to him by reading the Bible. I hope you get a personal growth plan and write in there, read the Bible daily, and then make that a plan. Now, a lot of us, we shy away from that. It's like, it just seems, I don't have time for that. I don't know if I could commit to that. But just know, this could look different for everybody, right? It doesn't have to be what we're doing right now we have the Read the Bible app that we're really encouraging people to do. And some of us are really excited about it and we're loving it. But maybe that's not where you are right now. Maybe it needs to look different for you. And so if you have YouVersion on your smartphone, and if you don't, I would encourage you to get it. Just Google or search for Bible in your app store, and YouVersion will be the first thing that pops up. It's a free app created by a church in Oklahoma. And it's amazing. They will have 100 different ways to get you the scripture on a daily basis. They'll send you 100 different reading plans that you could do. They'll send you just the verse of the day that you can meditate on. They'll send you verses throughout the day, every 3 hours or 4 hours, so that it's popping up on your phone. It could look like just taking your very favorite Bible verse, writing on a 3x5 card, and for like 3 weeks just kind of pulling it out every day and thinking about it. What does it say about God? What does it say about me? What does it say about a relationship? Kind of just reflecting on how can I apply this in my life. To be a Christ follower, it's all about connection. Jesus is inviting us into a connection with him. And he says if we stay connected to him, we will bear much fruit. But then he reminds us apart from him, we can do nothing. And so some of us need to hear his call like for the very first time, like those very first disciples who heard those two words, follow me, from Jesus. And some of us need to respond to that call for the very first time today. Maybe you've never said, I'm ready to follow Jesus. But today you're like, I want what he has. I want to connect to him. And you need to maybe turn away from your selfishness and sin and maybe even the doubts and the unanswered questions that you have and just say, I'm going to connect to Jesus today. I'm going to follow him. I'm going to respond to his call in my life. And I'm going to begin 2018 in a relationship with him. Others of us, we would say, you know what, I'm already connected to him, but I need to widen the circumference of that connection. I want more of him. I want to go deeper with him. And so what does that look like for you? What will that mean for you? How will you connect to Christ in 2018? Some of us are stalled spiritually, and we're just like, and you know what you need to do. You know, you just need to do the things you know what you need to do in order to connect with Jesus. This is what it means to be a follower of Christ, and Jesus is offering the invitation to all of us again today. Would you be my follower? Would you connect to me? Let's pray together. Father in heaven, may we connect to you the way the branch connects to the vine. And may we experience life as you intend for it to be lived. Spirit-filled, life of forgiveness and freedom, life of purpose and meaning, life with hope, not only in this life, but in the life to come. God, wherever we find ourselves today, connect us to you. May we each make the decision to connect to you and widen the circumference of that connection so that we can have more of you in our lives, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.